Tonight, I'm excited to introduce you to artist Danny Hart. We're going to talk to Danny about how he is making a living as a full-time artist and what it took to get there. I'm your host, Ann Kelly. If this is our first time meeting, you might be wondering who I am. That's fair. In a nutshell, I have been into art basically my entire life. And about 20 years ago, I made the decision to move to Santa Fe, New Mexico to go to art school and further immerse myself in the Santa Fe art scene. I've now been working in the professional gallery world for about 15 years now. And I started art in the raw about halfway through 2020. And if you'd like to know more, check out the description of the video. You'll find a little more information as well as an interview that I did with Lens Scratch. In the meantime, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Danny. So thanks for joining us, Danny.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Ann. Thanks for having me.
And where are you today?
In my studio, home studio in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
You are the owner and creator at Danny Hart Design.
I've tacked on studio to the end of that. It's sort of a newer thing. It's not official in the business name. Yeah, so Danny Hart Design Studio, which is a bit of a mouthful, but there's just something about it, like adding that last word to the end. I don't know. I never wanted to have the business that just ended in design.
And how long have you been doing that for?
This is, I'm going on my 5th year. 2021 is my 5th year full time.
Well, congratulations.
Thank
and I think
you.
That's kind of how it goes. The longer you do something, you start tweaking little details. And
I feel like it's constantly shooting from the hip.
You work with wood.
People always scoff at me when I say this and say that I'm being humble, but like I'm not a great carpenter. I'm a good carpenter. I've been doing it for a long time. But I like to call myself a designer first. I just happen to use wood as a medium. There's a lot of things that I think I do with wood that a lot of really high-end, high-quality carpenters might look at and cringe in my process, because I either don't have the right tool for it or I never learned how to do it the right way. And so I just do what works for what I need to do. So I'm a designer who primarily works in wood. Call it a carpenter, if you will.
You're known for your jewelry, but you also recently started a home goods collection. And I know in the past you'd made furniture.
It started actually with lighting. I got a bachelor's in architecture, and I made my first light fixture in the School of Architecture with the intention of always being an architect eventually. But there was something about the scale of that I really enjoyed. And so the first thing I did was I made light fixtures and, made a few pieces of furniture, mostly for myself. And the jewelry was it came by accident, but really is what grew the business to what it is now and has kind of become my bread and butter. It's interesting then coming back into this last year where fairs were no longer a thing. It was hard to get my jewelry in front of people's eyes on different levels. So I got a lot of people hitting me up about making furniture. So I made more tables and light fixtures last year than I had in, I don't know, the last 5 years really. And it was just in 1 year's time, and still made a lot of jewelry, but it was a really great change of pace to kind of go back to what started the business and making more of that again. And now in turn, doing this home goods line is kind of like a combination between the functional furniture side of things and then jewelry.
You have kind of an interesting story of how the business came to be. As I understand it, someone broke into your house and that was actually started the business.
100%. I had done a few like studio tours with friends of mine in their studios with the light fixtures and stuff. Always had this idea that I was going to sell at markets, fairs. Anytime I did, nobody would buy any of these really high dollar items that I had. So I was always looking for that thing, like what can I make that brings more people in? And it was after our house got broken into and all of my wife's jewelry got wiped out. And this was like 6 years ago now. And she didn't have any real high dollar items. A lot of it was, she was in the Coast Guard. So she was all over the world and in coastal towns, and had necklaces and earrings from street markets in Bermuda and a bracelet from Ireland. like random kind of tchotchke type unique gifts, and she loved her jewelry, but it was all literally wiped out, thrown into a pillowcase and wiped out. And I had some ideas and felt bad and was like, honey, I'm going to make you a few things just so you have something to wear. And she was a student at the time and, wore a few pairs of earrings and a necklace on campus. And she'd come home and tell me like, oh, I got like 5 different compliments from people today on what I was wearing. And so she encouraged me to keep making more. And I did. And it literally started from, I had this little 2 foot by 2 foot. It was once like an end table for a sofa.
Mhm.
And I would sit at that end table in my living room after my kids would go to bed. And my wife and I would put on the show that we're watching. And I had my little Japanese pull saw and I would cut shapes and then paint the edges and would do it all from this little table and kept making more and more and more. It was awful getting robbed. It felt completely violating. But at the same time, had that not happened, who's to say where I'd be right now? I was working construction at the time too, which was just fine. I've learned a lot working construction over the years.
Mhm.
But at that point, I hated it.
This when you were going to school for architecture. Were you working as a carpenter at the same time?
Yeah, so I started working as a finished carpenter for a local builder in my second year of the architecture program. The idea was always just to get like one-to-one building experience. I was tired of the architecture student that could like make pretty things on a computer screen, but they didn't actually know how it all went together. And for me, it was so important to understand the connections of material to place, and like what shaped our environment. And so that's why I did that. And it was great. It was a great experience. So when I started doing that, yeah, I would work all day, come home, be with my kids. At the time it was just my 2 kids. They'd go to bed and I wasn't doing any of this stuff until after they went to bed.
Mhm.
And once I started garnering some attention and did my first fair and sold a bunch, that it was like, okay, this could be a thing. I've spent so many late evenings after working all day and parenting kids, and I still do sometimes, not as much as I used to. Just grinding, knowing that like this is great. This can lead me to something bigger.
This is your full-time job
Oh yeah,
now.
fully now.
So maybe you're working late into the night after putting the kids to get bed, but it's not after your other 9 to 5.
My other job, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
which is great. And I tell you, as cliche as it gets, like I don't feel like I'm working most days. There's some tasks that I have, and I can get into that, but like certain production items, certain pieces I've just made so many times over that it just feels like I'm making it just to make it and
Sure.
just to make a buck, which is a whole nother conversation of itself of business and art and where those two worlds blend. But on the whole, I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't fully appreciate and enjoy the fact that I get to just flow and let my mind go wild and make what I want to make.
That's kind of the dream.
Yeah,
And
no, really.
and the earrings I'm wearing, I believe you've been
Hmm.
making these for a long time from what I can tell.
Yeah, oh yeah, those have become a staple for sure.
Mhm.
And I don't know that I will ever let go of those. For one, year in year out, like once again last year, the hoops were my best selling jewelry item, and that's how it's been for the last 4 years of making them. And so it's hard to let go of that for 2 reasons. For business reasons, of course, and I hate to say that, but then also like people truly find enjoyment in wearing them, and that brings me joy too. So it took me a while to get to that design. Like I went through multiple iterations of that kind of faceted style before I came to that final design.
Well, and I love the whole architecture influence. I was telling you earlier that the first time I saw them, I didn't really know who made them or anything like that. I just happened to run into them when I was not shopping for jewelry. And so that I didn't buy them at that time, but I just continued to think about them. But they stuck with me. And I think like any great piece of jewelry, art, furniture, just anything like that, if something sticks with you like that, it's just that really means something.
One of the reasons I miss fairs so much is I'm so extroverted, when I'm around people, but when I'm in my studio, I want nobody around. Like I work alone. I've had people help me before and I kind of hate it. But after a long week of just grinding and I get to that market and I sell and I get to talk about my work and people come up and they say, "Oh my God, I've had these earrings for 2 years. I wear them almost every day. They're so light. People compliment me all the time. I just love them." It means a ton to me because I put a ton of energy and I believe in this like energy exchange between
Mhm.
people, that like I put a ton of energy into not only the process of making the original designs, but then every piece therein after that. That when I put those out into the world and then somebody takes those, puts them on, I swear a lot of it is that energy that was put into them that they feel gives them the confidence that they may need in that moment, and they get complimented. And I don't know that it's always the earrings that gets the compliment. It might be the way they're carrying themselves that day because they're wearing something that makes them feel really good. It's really cool to hear those stories.
In this past year, I haven't really been out many places. Most of the times I've worn these have been at home
Sure.
or recording episodes. I've shown them off on some other Art in the Raw episodes.
Oh, I see. I've seen.
But I've come to realize that I don't buy jewelry or purses or stuff like that. I've come to realize it's for me. I enjoy them. Maybe
Yeah,
no one even sees me in them.
I think you really hit onto something. I mean, and I feel that way with my own. My wife really forces me to buy things for myself. I'm not great about buying myself new clothes or shoes, and I will just wear things until they're literally falling off my body,
Yeah.
and they'll be in tatters, and I'm like, I look fine. And when I do end up getting, and even this last year, when I've gotten myself a new pair of pants, it's like, well, I'm not going anywhere. But when
Hmm.
I put them on, it's like, oh, like I feel really good. And they're comfortable, and like I'm just gonna sit around my house in these nice pants because I feel good in them. And I don't really
Hmm.
care if anybody sees me in them because damn, I feel good. And I think a lot of people feel that way about, especially like smaller brand locally made products, and maybe they do about the bigger ones too, but I think the people like yourself, like it's like you're getting this thing that not a lot of people have, and there's something about it that really taps into your spirit, and what you're feeling, that I think a lot of other people have tapped into this last year also.
Even though I know this is one of your more popular designs, there's certain elements like you get to pick from one of three types of wood,
Mm-hmm.
and the wood's mostly locally sourced as I understand it, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
like different colors you get to pick from. So even though I know these are not, I'm not the only person with these earrings, i I chose that combination, and you handmade them. So
Yeah, there's no two. That's the beauty of wood as well, though. It could be the same board, but 1 foot down the board, the grain has decided to twist and turn because of a branch that once existed right on the other side of, on the end of that board, and so the grain turns on you, and so you might be getting a completely wild grain pet. Like it's like I can see yours. It's walnut,
mhm.
and it's an exceptionally dark part of the board. Like I've made those in that same color combination with walnut, but the walnut happens to be much, much lighter. It's funny when I'll have, I'll do markets and I'll present a bunch of different pairs that I've made. Some might be a color that I've never used before. And, I'm trying to prepare for a market. So I make a bunch of the ones that I know do well, but they might not do well that weekend. There might be something about this other color that people are completely drawn to on that day for whatever reason, and that's entirely personal to them. That has nothing to do necessarily with me. It's just like, no, no, this is talking to me, this color, this chartreuse, magenta, whatever it may be, and there's something about this wood grain on this piece that is just calling to me. I love that so much.
Well, and then you're born and raised in New Mexico, and you've
Hmm.
also talked a bit about the colors that you use, and it's always kind of a subtle part of the jewelry. Maybe these ones have a little more color, but a lot of times it's mostly the wood, and there's just kind of that pop of color.
Yeah.
But having, like I said, I'm not from New Mexico, but I've lived here for 20 years, and the colors, I do see how they could be inspired by by New Mexico beyond. I have some turquoise ones as well. Those ones are a
Sure.
little.
Nice. Yeah. You know, it's also like maybe bucking what was trendy and hot when I was in the School of Architecture. I mean, even some of my favorite architects, their buildings are entirely white, incredibly sterile, or they're entirely concrete, steel, glass, and concrete, very, brutalist, I guess you could call it in some cases, but entirely devoid of color. And while I really appreciated and liked those architects, some of my favorites were Mexican architects, Legorreta in particular. His use of magenta in houses and like state buildings and commercial buildings as just like a bold, in your face, we are not hiding from these colors that are seen in everyday life. As a matter of fact, we're going to put them right in your face and bring that light to you. It was almost like, if you saw some of the work that I did as a student, I was constantly trying to inject color, and oftentimes there were times where teachers really appreciated it, but I think sometimes they would try to get me to pull back and reserve myself a little bit more. I love that balance. So it's like, in presenting the wood in terms of a natural material, I think a lot of that is also a New Mexican idea, and the natural beauty around us and the amount of open spaces that we have, and really brought on by the amount of like national parks, the fact that there's the reservations and the Pueblo lands that don't allow private building. Like, we're lucky to have the drive that we have from Albuquerque to Santa Fe with as little development as we have. So it's just natural beauty all around. And to then, within that is injected, somebody from out of state might not see any green, but if you look hard enough, there's yellows and pinks and blues and turquoise and, deep oranges and bright oranges. And so it's this, perfect balance of like natural beauty and these pops of colors that you may not see otherwise. So it's kind of a little bit of the natural habitat and landscape, and some of it is like these architectural influences as well.
Do you know the Marion Center building at the College of Santa Fe? Most of the building is desert colors, but then there's kind of these highlights.
I know what you're talking about.
Going to school in that building, I mean, it was kind of
Yeah.
like living in art for a few years, just kind of walking from class to class certain times a day with that New Mexico light or storms rolling in. It was kind of an amazing experience.
It's wild that in a city state like, between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, that more color is not presented in our local architecture. Like, I'm not going to get too deep into it. I don't want to ruffle feathers, but like New Mexico was Mexico at one point. While a lot of those buildings were built out of mud, Mexican architects built with color, and they injected color, and there were a lot of muralists. And one of my best friends from Santa Fe, still one of my best buds, he was a fine arts student at UNM. He was an intern for Federico Vigil, the fresco painter who did the Torreon at the Hispanic Cultural Center.
Oh, wow.
And he did an interview with him. And one of the things that Federico commented on was how weird it is that we're no longer really building with mud. It's all kind of this faux Pueblo revival style architecture, but we continue to make it look like mud. And he always likened it to being caca brown. Like, there's no color anymore. Like, we're surrounded with color, but all the homes that we live in are all caca brown.
Right.
And like, that really stuck with me early on. And this is even before I got into the program. And just that, listening to that interview that my buddy did with him, it really stuck with me. And this, like, well, why aren't we injecting more color into the things that we're surrounded with each day in terms of architecture? Like, you made it brown, but it's still a house. You're not going to make it blend in with the trees anymore because it's brown. It's still a building. Put some color in there, brighten things up a little bit. There's something about adding color to things that I just find so much joy in, kind of lightens up the mood almost.
Well, you do it in this really beautiful kind of subtle way where it doesn't become all about the color.
Sure.
That it gets to be about the wood, but this nice highlight.
I tell people it frames the wood. I've done it a lot on tables too. I'll paint the entire underside of a tabletop and it'll come up onto the edges, but the top is all the natural finish. Just seeing that line of color or paint around the outside, it almost makes you focus more on the material and then the color becomes secondary, and it's like this back and forth of like, oh, but the color, oh, but it really, like, this wood is incredible. They play off each other really well.
I agree. It would be a shame also if you just painted everything, just losing the grain. I think you had mentioned Japanese wood carving earlier.
Mhm.
That's pretty fascinating. They actually burn the wood. Now I'm kind of curious what, if any, sort of influence that might have.
Actually, when I was in the School of Architecture, second year in the program, one of our professors, brand new, he was coming from Australia, but before that, he had lived in and taught at Japanese universities. And
Mm.
so he organized a trip for all of us architecture students to go to Japan. And we went to Japan for 2 weeks and toured the city. We spent a few days in Kyoto, Yokohama, which is like prefectures of Tokyo. And we did this 3 day design exchange with some Japanese students out there. It was just this quick, like, charrette mock up. We were given certain materials. This is the brief. We basically did almost like industrial design, architectural based street installations using cardboard, wood, and the handful of like carpentry tools that are available in their shop. Japan really, really got to me. Like, I loved every minute of that trip. I loved the people. I loved the systems, the organization, the infrastructure, the style of building, the level of just respect for not only one another, but the built environment along with the natural environment. That trip really stuck with me for a while. And even now, as a side hobby, for the last 9 years, I do bonsai. Like, I have a bunch of bonsai trees in my backyard.
Cool.
Yeah, it's something I've been doing for a while. And one of the collections that I started a couple years ago, it's on my website. I call it the Fired Collection, but it's essentially taking that Shou-sugi-ban or yakisugi technique of burning wood. In this case, it's not for the practical functional reasons that the Japanese did it as a means of sealing wood. So they would Shou-sugi-ban, like, it almost literally translates to like burnt cedar siding,
Hmm.
and they would burn this cedar, use it as siding, but by burning it, it like tightens up and closes up the pores and makes it far more impenetrable to moisture. And then they would come through with like a linseed oil to maintain that color, so you're not getting like soot leaking all over the place. Just the functional reasons alone, it's an incredibly beautiful way of attacking a problem. Like, how poetic is that? They didn't start doing it until the 1700s, but it's just that design, problem solving is so Japanese. It's like using one natural element with another natural element to solve a problem. It's not like I'm going to bend this problem to my will, like this like American way of doing things. I'm going to take these two natural elements, blend them in a beautiful way, and I can still have this great simplistic architecture. With my jewelry, it's more about capturing the physical beauty of burning wood in the way that it opens up the pore, adds a texture and a tonality that you wouldn't get by just painting it black. Where it gets really tricky is when you're burning really small pieces of wood because of how the wood reacts to the fire. There was a good year's time there, and I still do some from time to time because they're for sale on my website. But there was a good year's time there where I was just in my studio, just burning wood left and right, just constantly taking a torch. I'd make some new design or shape, and I'd make it and just burn it and see how it would react.
I'm so glad I asked about that. Is there any jewelry that's currently on your website that is made in that way?
Yeah, so it's called the Fired Collection.
I'm
Uh,
gonna pull that up.
yeah, and in some cases, it's like I burn just sections where brass or bronze meets the wood. Jewelry, I mean, really, any of them. You might even be able to scroll down and find the collection. Oh, see, there you go. Those ginkgo earrings are burnt. The sunburnt earrings, those are, that black comes from taking a torch to the wood. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Hmm.
now I need another pair of earrings. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, got you. See, this is why not being able to sell in person is so difficult anymore. I
Sure,
I used
sure.
to I used to be able to talk to people about the process and get them to pick the piece up and check it out and look closely and really understand and feel what goes into the making the piece, and then it's like not only that, but the way the different metals that I'm using like interact with the wood. It's not a difficult task, but it was certainly not easy to figure out how to make that functional, to keep that bronze there even after I burnt it, because I that bronze goes into the wood and then I burn it.
Oh, wow. Right. So,
Yeah, which is because you're not going to get as clean of a line otherwise, and it's just that really has so much to do with my process of everything that I do. It's just trial and error, what works, what doesn't, messing up 9, 10, 11 pairs before I figure out, oh, this is how I do it. This is what is going to give me the best results. And then it's just copy and repeat. There's a whole line. I've got necklaces and other things. It's really fun. I still really enjoy doing it.
what else is in that category while we're there? I guess anything,
Yeah.
the
I think that
sunburn.
most of the things that are all black, like those sunburnt earrings, and that 5-hole necklace is all burnt. There's some other ones on there that are just kind of playing with geometries more than anything else. And really that's what my jewelry is doing all together, is playing with different geometries and, balancing of shape and form, symmetry, some asymmetry, materiality. Burning the wood was just another technique to present more textural qualities to wood that maybe people wouldn't know otherwise.
Well, I'm so glad I asked about that because that was just
Yeah.
a technique I've always been fascinated with.
The actual technique that they do for making the siding, like you ought to YouTube it one of these days. Just it's either called Shou-sugi-ban or a yakisugi. They essentially take they like create a triangle out of the siding. They tie them together with wire and they literally put them on top of like a bonfire or like a fire pit. And then the fire burns up through the middle of the three pieces, shoots out the top. And it almost creates this like fire stack. And then they take that and they set that aside and then they do three more pieces. It's beautiful to see the process done too. It's just completely amazing that they figured that out and that this will repel water. It's so amazing.
That really is. Well, I have the website up. I've also had my eye on the bracelets. These ones are sold out. You'll make more though.
Pretty sure you can custom order the bangles. This also goes into, and one thing that I struggle with is the fact that I still have a business to run, and I'm still trying to grasp with and deal with the difference between inventory, making a certain amount of inventory available, and then when it's sold out, and having it always available so that people can buy it whenever they want to buy it.
Right.
And you even said it earlier, like you didn't buy a certain pair of earrings until you knew that you weren't ever going to be able to get them again.
It's true.
And yeah, and that's something that I kind of hate and love all at the same time, because you're kind of getting into this whole other realm. It's like not even art anymore. It's like psychology and this like scarcity effect.
Mm-hmm.
And when people know they can't have something, well, it's like, I better get on it, or you can't tell me I'm going to get it right now, And so with this new home goods collection, it's like I've just been producing these small batches of work, and like I'm only making 10 and I'll make more at some point, but these are the 10 that are available. And if you get them, you get them. It's brought a certain amount of like peace and easiness to me. Sometimes I felt like when somebody could custom order something, that I was always at the whim of what they wanted, when they wanted it, and how they wanted it, even though that's how I presented the website. It messes with me even psychologically. Like you can see right there, that's, sold out. It's a weird thing to see on my website because it was never like that before. Everything was always just like, you just can always get it. And so I wouldn't always sell a ton. And really COVID forced me to try to be creative, not only with the art that I'm presenting, but then how I'm going about it as a business model.
And this new Hart at Home line is collaborative, right? You're working
just
with
the ceramics, those salt cellars in particular. Everything else is all my work.
Are you fabricating the metal as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I invested in a small army of what are called dapping or doming blocks, and so I've got all these different shapes and sizes of hard steel blocks that have the concave, and then there's a second punch, which is the convex ball that you hammer the shape into. And even that, it took me a while to figure that out. But like so much of everything else I've done, I mean, even the jewelry to start, and like the lighting, for instance, I started doing light fixtures because it was a requirement for a class. The
Mhm.
first piece of furniture I made was because I was a bachelor and I didn't have a coffee table, so I made myself a coffee table. I started making jewelry because my wife's jewelry got stolen, so I made her some. Well, this year's Christmas present for my wife was a set of measuring spoons.
Mm.
I happened to be at Harbor Freight, and they had this set of dapping blocks, and I was like, oh, I bet you I could make these measuring spoons out of those. And so I made her a set, and this was when I was talking to you earlier, like this before the horse mentality. I like made the measuring spoons. I should have known at this point that like when I make something that I'm really excited about, if I put it out in the world, good chances are a lot of other people are going to be excited about it too.
Mhm.
And so I took some good pictures, posted it, and just the amount of people that hit my inbox and were texting on the thread was just like, oh my God, I don't know that I was ready for this. And I hadn't even fully figured out the easiest and most efficient way of shaping the cups. And I didn't even own a lathe at that point. I was just like hand shaping the handles. And it was just like, oh my God, maybe I put this out there a little bit too quick. Like I knew I wanted to do this, but I didn't think it was going to get this type of attention. There's a part of me that thinks that like it may not have gotten the same attention 2 years ago with people at home as often as they are. Suddenly it's like, well, I'm buying these, and like even the measuring spoons, like the process and the amount of time it took me to figure it out, to make each one, to get the tools and the process down in order to make them. Like I was selling them for $100 a set, which felt really weird, but not really making a whole lot of money on those, but it was just fun to make and put out there, and they look beautiful. And I think for the people that bought them, it's like, well, I'm at home every day. I'm baking bread, I'm baking cookies. This has kind of replaced my jewelry on some level. Like I'm not going out, so I'm not wearing a whole lot of stuff. This is the stuff that makes me feel really good.
Mhm.
And I think it goes back to, once again, like it's such a personal thing for people, and then when they tell me that, it's like, oh, it's a personal thing for me too. I love that. And so they're getting these things because it makes them feel really good to bake their bread or bake their cookies with their kids with these really nice measuring spoons from a local artist that they purchased.
I'll tell you, my salt grinder broke last night, and the first thing I thought of was your salt bowl. I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
Hey now.
maybe I need that. Oh, but it's sold out, so I don't know
Well,
if you're
so
making
that
more.
one, so those were done with one of my, who has become one of my best friends.
Mhm.
I met her years ago when I actually did the remodel on her house when I was still working construction, and her and I just hit it off. We're so like-minded. I swear we're brother and sister in another life. She's been a nurse practitioner for years and years,
Mhm.
and her and I have always, sent each other images of the stuff we're making. And just this year, she decided that she was going to leave her job because she was no longer happy doing it, and was going to commit to being a full-time artist herself. And so she's making, her name's Tamara Rigatini, Cloudhead Ceramics.
Cool.
And so I hit her up and was like, hey, let's make some salt cellars. Can you make me 10 of these, just little dish? And they're small. They're smaller than they look in the picture, these first ones. And just once again, like I made them, I bought a lathe, and I turned the lids, and then, hammered out the spoons and the little handle at the back of the spoon. Just, it's got a nice balance up on top. There's actually a like a mortise or a dado through the top of the lid, so the spoon actually sits into a groove on the lid. And once again, like I put them out there, and people just really enjoyed the look and the style. And so we're going to start making a bunch more of these, and we're going to do larger sizes and smaller sizes, and just
And
have
like
fun
your
with it.
jewelry, there's different colors.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really very cool. And just in terms of collaborating, that is a very common thing in music. You mentioned you play music,
Yep.
but in terms of art making, it does not happen as often. So
Yeah, I've got several collaborations kind of coming down the pipeline, actually. This one in particular, and Tamara and I are going to make some more stuff together. But then Jen, do you know Jen Foxley, Foxley Handmade?
I don't think I
Most of the
do.
So most of the collaborators that I'm going to be working with are more like everyday products, industrial design type things. So she does handbags and pouches. Really, really excellent seamstress. She has a background in, I believe, community and regional planning, but like landscape architecture, kind of all the same umbrella. But her handbags and pouches are incredibly popular here in Albuquerque because she like hand prints different designs, and she collaborates with other artists. She has some of her own designs, does great leather handbags and totes and things. So her and I are going to collaborate on a small batch and series of like clutches and like a throwback to like the mid-century kind of like gala handbags.
Cool. Well, I look forward
Yeah.
to seeing all of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking with her today about it actually, and getting the initial ball rolling on design inspiration. And coming from that architecture background, it's like we were constantly forced to work with each other and rub elbows, and we were put in groups all the time. And in construction, it's like I was working with people all day, every day. I was putting other people's designs together and giving my own input, and it can be a very difficult process, but if you're willing to, flow with that process, it can yield just incredible results. Things that you may not have thought of are going to come of it because of the other person's input, and vice versa. So
Sure.
I'm looking forward to this year. Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
terms of the light fixtures and furniture,
I've got another tab on my website of
okay.
all furniture and all lighting. There's another tab on there of a different collaboration I did with a local artist, David Santiago,
Hmm.
which is worth a look. Like real big, gaudy jewelry, where he does these like highly detailed, basically like realistic portraits of women that we
Mm.
painted onto these necklaces that are really great. But you'll find a lot of the furniture on there as well. And I've actually got a couple projects I'm working on right now. A table with a client that I'm meeting up with this next weekend to kind of decide final details and materials and shape and stuff.
It's like the original painting is kind of the more expensive item, but then you can buy prints. Whereas maybe it's a little bit like that with your work, whereas the more expensive pieces are tables, things like that. But then you can also buy a pair of earrings for less than $100.
You really hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think about that often, and I think when artists do that, it's a business mentality, and I think it's important for artists to have a business mentality and know how to brand themselves and understand that, like, yes, I am going to sell this handful of prints at this price because I want people who, that's where that word accessibility comes back in. I want the people that want to be able to hang nice work on their walls. Like they should be able to hang it, but it's nice knowing that it's coming from me because they're still supporting me. They may not buy the original, but they're still supporting an artist. And maybe 5-10 years from now, they can afford something original. And I think about that all the time. 4 years ago now, I launched a Kickstarter for a kit of parts light fixture called the Ammonite. It was shaped like an ammonite or like a nautilus shell. It was a series of wood veneer, like laser cut triangles that decreased in size or increased depending on how you looked at it, and that were assembled from a central axis with a baggie of hardware that I provided. When I first did that, I had the intention that I was going to get myself a laser cutter, and I was going to start designing a lot more of these flat packed kit of part light fixtures. It was almost like the idea of like an IKEA, ready to assemble RTA furniture and cabinets and lighting. But in this case, it was like I wasn't just going to make it for sale all the time. I was only going to make 200 of a light, and almost like a print, you only get one of 200 or one of 100. The same was with this light fixture. I sold 115 of them. It was such a learning process doing this Kickstarter. The amount of work was just insane. The amount of packaging and boxing and learning as I went, because I had to also be a creative writer, and which was like doing instructions, trying to describe to somebody how to put something together that I had put together every day for the last year. So how do I then take that and apply it to paper with pictures and say, this is how you do it? And so that was the idea behind it, though, is that like somebody might really like my design work, but they might not be able to buy a $1,200 light fixture, but they can get this $150, limited edition one that there's, 149 other ones out there, but I have one of those and it only costs me this amount. And I love it so much that a few years from now, I might end up buying the original or an original. I'm always trying to look at how I can balance that art and business world. The same friend who worked with Federico Vigil, one of the things that he always complained about and talked about is in art school, they will teach you how to paint like Picasso, how to do, sculpture and land art like Andy Goldsworthy, take wonderful photos like Nagatani. But they don't teach you how to brand yourself. They don't teach you how to build a business with what your mind creates. And so there's this stereotype in the world of the poor, working artist, the poor artist, that's dirty and they just do it because they love to make it, which is great and all, but like that perpetuates this cycle of it completely removes the word accessibility. It adds this weird elitist mentality to if you own it, but then the artist is poor and broke, and it's just this weird. It's a weird system that has kind of grown out of that, and I'm sure firsthand.
And a lot of people who are talented artistically, even though they're maybe a really creative person, they don't have the creativity that kind of extends into the business side of things.
Which you don't just have naturally.
Or they
Not
don't
many people do.
They do.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's a learned skill though. That like there's a reason why they have business schools and programs, and there's no reason why in major art programs that they don't have at least one class every year that you should have to take that's like, money management, branding, like how to build a brand for what it is that you're doing so that you can actually make a living off of this thing that you're giving us tens of thousands of dollars to learn how to do. And so these art programs, they churn through these great artists that are wonderfully talented and send them out in the world with all the skills to make the art, but none of the skills to sell it. And I think that's such a shame so often. Fortunately, with like this day and age, with social media platforms, podcasts, Audible, books on tape, like I've learned so much from just listening to, business podcasts and, how to maximize, social media output. And, I only practice so much of what I listen to, of course, but like, because it's difficult, but it's important to get that stuff in the back of your head and, and know that like, yeah, what, your art can be worth it. Your art is good enough. And there's no reason why you can't make a living off of this if you're willing to kind of put the work on the backside of it, not just that front side imagery stuff. So I'm thinking about that constantly.
But I recall in art school, most of the business of art classes were more just how to make slides and how to write your CV and your artist statement. Yeah, at that time it was how to make slides. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember I took several photography classes myself, and
that wasn't even that long ago, but it makes me
it really, I know. I mean, I think the photo classes I took were in like 2004. My kids are enamored by the Polaroid. My son has a Polaroid right now, and it just blows his mind,
How old is he?
I have an 11-year-old son. He's my stepson, Zeke. My daughter, Layla, who's also 11. 4 months apart, Zeke and Layla. And then I have my youngest son, Ozzy, who's 5.
So what sort of tools do you use?
I've got sort of the standard collection of, shop-based carpenters, table saw, miter saw, bandsaw, belt sander. What gets fun and what gets tricky is when I'm dealing with a new process and trying to learn what tool creates what I see in my head. Primarily, it's my collection of large power tools, and then I've got a great collection of chisels and small carving tools. My little rotary, like my Dremel tool, I use that constantly. My tabletop belt sander is really what allows me to shape and create the clean lines that I do. Lately it's been all of these like metal shaping tools that I've got and have been investing in over the last year or two that have been a big, asset to combining the wood and metal.
Kind of everything used to be made out of wood.
Yeah.
All boats used to be wood. New boats, maybe they have some wood elements. The art of making a wooden boat is kind of mind blowing. Just
Really though.
can you
Yeah,
imagine?
absolutely. I've done a little bit of steam bending or like water bending,
Oh,
and a
cool.
lot of that takes, yeah, a lot of that takes place in that kind of boat building process. But those are like lost crafts on
Yeah.
some level. And there's a lot of artists. I mean, there's a lot of things in the art world or just in where we are in general that are kind of coming back into fad on some level. And I think that has to do with accessibility to like how to's online to some obscure artist that is still making boats, and some kid, some teenager or 20 something comes across this guy and is like, oh, I want to do that. So I think we're seeing a resurgence of a certain amount of handcrafted skill that maybe kind of fell by the wayside for a while there.
Now that we have metal and plastic, you see a lot more products constructed from those materials.
Yeah.
Whereas, they used to carve clogs out of wood. Can you imagine walking around in wooden clogs all day?
No, yeah, no, really though. I think that's a great point. I mean, I pride myself on using as many hand tools as I can
Mhm.
in the finishing process. Like in particular, once again, I've got quite a few like Japanese block planes, Japanese chisels, my pool saws. So when you're talking about like American carpentry, it's interesting to see the difference between even just the mentality of building a tool. So a standard handsaw in American carpentry is based entirely upon the push. And so it's a heavier kerf, and that's the thickness of the blade. The metal is heavier, the handle is heavier, the teeth on the blade itself is heavier. And with Japanese hand saws, they're much thinner. In some cases, they have a secondary piece of metal to stabilize that super thin blade. But the reason why it's thinner is because it operates primarily on the pull.
Mm.
And I have definitely found that with that thinner metal, the thinner kerf, the finer teeth, and on that pull motion, that you can be a lot more deliberate and exact with what it is that you're trying to do. I really pride myself on trying to use those hand tools as much as possible. And if I can, especially in jewelry, I mean, the furniture all has to be kind of handmade on some level, but with jewelry, like I could buy hooks, I could buy all the different wires that your earrings hang from, but it's really important to me that at the end of the day, I am making as much of the product as I possibly can. And so I've got so many of these little hand tools that allow me to do that. Different shape pliers, large, small, saws, drill bits, all these different things that allow me to manipulate these small sizes in ways that I want them. And there's some tools that I might never use. And then all of a sudden, I've got this problem and I'm like, oh, I have that one tool. I've got this big metal punch that I've been sitting on for 10 plus years.
Mhm.
And recently I needed to punch larger holes through bronze to make these bun wraps, these like hair wraps.
Mhm.
And that tool has become one of my most used tools in the last year out of nowhere. This like obscure, like metalsmith punch that just was sitting around in my shop.
Apparently, the oldest example of a carved wooden object is 300,000 years old, and it's in Germany, and it's a spear.
Oh, wow.
To think about these guys carving spears out of wood with bones, and it's, I don't know. I love it.
Like I want no I and you wonder what that is too. It's like I think even these guys 300,000 years ago compared to like a business, let's say, here they are. How can I be most efficient in my day today? Well, I'm
Yeah.
surrounded by trees and sticks. There's only so many stones that work properly. They break easily. I only have so much access to bones, but I've got all these trees and sticks all over the place. So, you
And the
know,
stones and bones are harder than the trees.
yeah,
So,
exactly. That stuff's amazing. Well, I think it comes down to necessity and just like they made that because they needed that.
right. They needed
And
the
I,
spear to defend themselves from
yeah.
predators.
Well, and I'm certainly not saying that I'm like early Homo sapien or anything, but like it's we're still doing that, like I'm only doing what I'm doing because I made what I needed to start. Like I needed these things, I needed these objects. I don't need, I guess, is a loose term these days. I wanted a coffee table and didn't want to buy one, so I'm going to make one myself. I
Sure.
needed to make a light fixture for my class. I needed / wanted to make jewelry for my wife. As time changes, our wants and needs obviously change, but I think we're still doing that. Big difference is nowadays we realize, oh well, hey, we can monetize that too. So interesting how that works.
Right. Different version of survival.
Yeah, certainly,
Yeah.
certainly.
You're not fighting the woolly mammoth.
No, totally. It's still primal on some
Able to
level, though. I'm
pay
fighting
people.
other beasts. Yeah, that's for darn
Yeah.
sure.
So you mentioned collecting tools and maybe things you might make art out of. Are there other things that you collect? It's
Um,
something I like to ask people about.
yeah. So I I grew up in a home where my mom was a collector.
Mm,
My mom's father was he did not like to get rid of things. He was a firm believer in you buy it once and you hold on to it, and if you can find it used and it's high quality, then you hold on to it. And he was certainly that generalized grandfather that said they don't make it like they used to, which it's true, they don't. I collected things all through my childhood, from baseball cards to pewter figurines to I had a massive collection of Pez dispensers at one point, and these were all like collections that my mom encouraged. Like, and then I got really into like those little small car models, and so I would build and collect car models. Like even now, I don't know that I would call myself a collector of tools, but like because it's become so much less about like when you collect something, I feel like that's more of like a personal like hobby type of enjoyment, and whereas now so much of if I get a tool and I hold on to it, I'm not collecting it. I just have in mind that like I could potentially use this for a project down the road. I've got a set of lathe tools. This is something else I've had for quite a while, that my grandpa gave me 20 years ago when I went out there to visit in my like freshman year of college with my parents, and he gave me these set of it's like the brand Craftsman. This
yes.
is like craftsman lathe tools from like the 1950s. And he gave them to me, and they were in a leather case with velvet lining on the inside, like solid oak handles, just exquisite tools. And I've held on to those this entire time. And I haven't not had the chance to use them until the last 3 weeks when I bought a lathe. And so, yeah, it's like, I don't know that I would call myself a collector per se anymore, but I still like to hold on to things that I feel like have either a sentimental value or a potential value in some form down the road.
I mean, maybe I'm sounding like your grandfather, but you can't buy like that anymore.
No, no, you really can't.
I think I had read somewhere, maybe another interview with you about just the smell of wood.
Yeah.
And not that I have a lot of experience, but just in taking a few shop classes in high school, I know exactly what you mean by that. I
Yeah.
mean, if you
Hmm.
say that, I can smell that, and it takes you back. So
I think everybody does on some level,
yeah.
because carpentry and woodwork, it doesn't stop at the scent of wood. Does not start and stop with carpentry.
Mm-mm.
That goes to I love trees. I mean, I mentioned to you that I do bonsai as a hobby. Like I'm a big plant person, but trees in particular are
Mhm.
like mind blowing to me in terms of an organism, in the way they go through their life cycles, the material makeup, and what makes up that material makeup, and even what we've learned in the last 10 years in the way they feed each other through fungal connections, through root systems and soils. But they put off an incredible scent, whether they're dead, alive, milled, processed. That smell for somebody walking through a northern New Mexico wood, up near Mora or Pecos or Chama or something, they know when they're amongst the ponderosa pine again. It's drawing on that. Once again, it's drawing on that memory, and I think wood can do that for a lot of people. And aside from like all the ephemeral and sort of mystical side of it, it's the one building material that does not smell awful when you work it. You think about building and architectural materials, you concrete, masonry in general, bricks, concrete, tile, drywall, fiberglasses, the even plywood, like manufactured woods. Wood is the one material that is in its kind of natural form from, on some level, beginning to end. And when you work it, it just smells brilliant. I love how multifaceted that is.
The Japanese gardens in
Haven't.
Portland, I
Mm-mm.
they have an amazing bonsai collection there, and I
I
think
believe
they're
it.
credited with being kind of the best Japanese gardens outside of Japan. So
Yep.
when the gates reopen, go. It's amazing.
So I'm not sure if this is the same one, but there's a museum up there called the Pacific Bonsai Museum, and it might be the same one. I'm really into it. It's something that it's like a big passion of mine outside of my work. It's really, and I've had people ask me like, would you ever sell these? And it's such a personal art form for me that I never could, because I don't want to sell everything. I want to enjoy. This is my thing, like
Yeah.
leave me alone. Um, but like Portland is kind of the apex of American bonsai and what they do up there. It is a whole other world in terms of the way they talk about the presentation of trees in a tiny container, and what that means, not only in terms of memory and what it can do to people when they see that, and their memories of a certain type of tree that they were around as a child in a specific forest. It's an amazing art form. I mean, it's one that, like, some of these trees will yield 10, 15, $20,000, but it doesn't stop there. You can't just hang it on the wall and forget about it. Like, you have to care for it day in, day out, meticulously, and if you don't, it'll die. And not only that, 5 years from now, it could potentially look completely different than it did 5 years prior, and then 10 years, and then 20 years, 30 years. That is powerful as an art form alone. So, like, if you ever really get curious, like, dig deep on that, because it is an amazing world.
The garden in Portland, it's not a huge collection, maybe 20 of them or so, but that's in addition to the whole gardens. And they've got the koi pond, and it's just a
Sure.
beautiful place. But they've
I
got
just love
little,
that world.
I do too. I
Yeah,
don't know what it is
love it.
about it. It's just I don't know. It's magical. And how long have you been collecting those?
So about 9 years now. I only have a couple
Hmm.
that I had from when I first started, because, first of all, horticulturally, it's really difficult to grow certain species in that small environment in such a hot, dry, arid place like New Mexico,
Yes.
Albuquerque in particular. So I'm like learning the nuances of what species do best here. Some like I probably lose at least one tree every year, and a lot of times it might be one that I purchased as a nursery plant, or something that I dug up from somewhere. It's like equal parts satisfying and equal parts maddening, because in terms of like making and designing things, like I can just bend everything to my will and decide that, like, this is what I want it to look like. If I want it to, some things just come natural and it flows easily, but if I really want to make it work the way I want it to, I can. But
Hmm.
with that art form, it's like, if I do too much at the wrong time, I'm just going to kill it. And so it's taught me more about patience and about understanding that, like, I don't have to do it all now. And I try to take those small lessons and bring them back into what I'm doing, because I can be such an impatient person. I want to see the finished product. And if I try that with a bonsai tree, I will just completely, I'll kill it. I'll do too much at once and it'll die. But it's weird to think about that.
Can't break
So
out the power tools and say, okay,
no, yeah.
that's
So it's
technical balance.
interesting. Oh, it's incredible. It's difficult, but I mean, that sort of theme runs hand in hand through Japanese culture across the board, and I think that's what really draws me to it, is like this balance between man and nature. And it's like, you can only do so much before you've done too much. It's like this give and take. I can give, and then it's going to give back to me. But if I just take constantly and want to make a pretty picture with it and make it look good all the time, it's not going to be able to, it's not going to be able to give back. So it's a wild world.
I'd love to know more about that. You mentioned you play music as
Hmm.
well. Tell me about that.
I play percussion. So I didn't play music when I was young.
Hmm.
It wasn't until I was 19, 20 years old. I was living in a house with one of my best friends. buddy I grew up with. I always knew he played drums, and we rented a house together, me, him, and then one other buddy of ours. And I think this was our freshman year of college.
Mhm.
And he brought his drum set down after a while and just set it up in the living room. And it was just there because he liked to play. And I was like, oh, that's cool. We ran into an old best friend of ours that we hadn't seen in a while. And now we're super close now, but like he hadn't seen him in a while. And this friend of ours, this is the same friend that did the internship with Federico Vigil. He had been playing guitar for a while and writing songs. We were like, okay, let's hang out. Let's be honest, like 19, 20 years old, we're meeting up so we could smoke weed and drink beers. And it's like, oh, well, you play guitar, I play drums. Let's play. And I was just kind of the spectator, I would just watch and enjoy.
Sure.
But it really struck a chord with me watching the process of them like making music together. Mm-hmm. And so this friend of mine, he was working on a biology degree, and he would do these week-long field trips where he'd be out tagging lizards in the Chiricahua region of southern New Mexico, and I'd be at home by myself. I was summertime, and I worked as a server late at night. Mm-hmm. And so during the day I had nothing better to do, and I would just sit there and I'd bang away on the drums, and I eventually taught myself. And him and that other buddy of mine ended up forming a small group. I got another one of our good friends to play bass with them, and they started gigging around, and they finally convinced me, like, hey, you can play drums, go buy some percussion. So I went out and bought a bunch of Latin percussion, congas, bongos, timbales, and just sort of painfully banged my way through the process of playing drums with them. Like, I did not sound good at first. Like, as a matter of fact, I was not good at first.
Well, how it starts, right?
Yeah, but I 100% stuck with it, and I practiced constantly because I wanted to get better. And I played in a group. We were called La Junta, and we played for like a solid 10 years, but we didn't really call it until after about 13 years. Mm-hmm. But we recorded 4 albums, went on 2. Yeah, we went on like 2 little tours through California and Arizona, and did a bunch of shows all the way from southern New Mexico to northern New Mexico a bunch of times. Those were some of the greatest years and times of my life, playing music with my best friends. And this is during the time that I was in the School of Architecture, so I was just constantly creating.
The name of the band sounds a little bit familiar.
There's a town in Colorado too called La Junta. La Junta means the gathering.
Okay. Cool.
We always joked that, like, we're on like Spotify and stuff, all of our music. Like, our lead singer is still one of my best friends. He writes just amazing songs, and it was everything from like reggae to rock to funk to hip hop, but really soulful, very catchy, well-written tunes. And we used to always joke that like we branded ourselves wrong. Like we were a group of, like, I was a white boy Latin percussionist. We had a white boy drummer. We had a black saxophonist who was born in Korea, and our lead singer, my best friend, is like, at the time, was like an overweight Hispanic. And so we were this weird, and that's why we called it La Junta, but it still never quite fit, Like, I remember when we played at the state fair one time, and they didn't know where to put us because they didn't actually listen to our music, but they just saw our name. And they decided to have us open for a very traditional, like, Tex-Mex norteño band, Al Hurricane Jr. I don't know if you know of Al Hurricane, but he's like the king of New Mexico, like, norteño music.
Oh, wow.
And so they just thought that La Junta would be perfect opening for Al Hurricane Jr. And here we are at the state fair, like, playing like reggae and hip hop to this, just the looks on their faces, like, what is this? It was just funny. So, the name didn't always fit the style of music, but yeah, we loved it. We made a good name for ourselves.
That's great.
Yeah.
So do you still play a little bit just for fun?
Yeah, no, for sure. But actually, before the pandemic started, I was playing drums with a couple local buddies of mine. A friend of mine who played in another band that we used to always play with back in the day, he decided to start his own little group, and we had done a couple gigs, we were rehearsing a bunch, and then COVID hit. I haven't really played music since. So, I mean, my son has an electric drum set. That's something he does. He does drum lessons once a week. My daughter does piano lessons once a week.
So you
So
can
I'll,
jam with the kids.
yeah, sometimes I'll hop on that electric drum set with some earbuds and rock out for a minute. Man, there is nothing like playing a live show with a packed crowd with people that you've been playing with for a long time. That is an indescribable feeling. Um, that's yeah, that's something that I really miss. Like I don't, we did our fair share of partying when we were in the band. I can't hang anymore. I'm too old for that. But I miss the shows. I don't miss the party. Man, do I miss playing great crowds and playing with my friends and just those were such amazing times.
I just miss being at shows and just
Yeah.
that kind of energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
My wife and I were just saying the same thing. We were like dancing with each other inside earlier, and it was just like, God, I wish we could be at a show right now.
But at least you have her to dance with. And
Exactly.
so in terms of travel, you mentioned going to Japan. Of all of the places that you haven't been, is there a place that's kind of high on the want to travel list when we can do that again?
Yeah, honestly, I as much as I miss being around people, like we camped a lot this summer. We've camped a lot more in the last several years. I used to go backpacking a lot in southern Utah. I can't wait to go on a road trip and hit some national parks. National parks that I've never been to that I really want to go check out. I really want to go see the redwoods. I've yet to see the redwoods.
Oh, they're amazing. You'll enjoy that.
Yeah, there's like almost too many cities to choose from to visit. I could think of any number of places to go that I think would just be fun and amazing to go to. But I really want to get out into nature a little bit more when the time presents itself. While I've been doing this for 5 years and working construction for a while before that, my wife has been a full-time student for the last 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, financially, we've never been able to do a whole lot just in terms of time with her in school and me, like hers and I's schedules kind of conflicting with each other at times. So like travel has not been like something that's been easy for us to do. And then, 3 kids, 3
Right.
plane tickets anywhere is like $1 million. But she is actually graduating this September.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, we are like a stone's throw away from these opportunities to do more than we have ever been able to do. And it's been 7 years, 1 child, 1 sold house, 1 bought house. We've been through so much in these last 7 years, and the fact that she's like almost done with school is kind of mind blowing. So outside of COVID, like the possibilities for us to travel are going to open up significantly here pretty soon, which is exciting.
Well, and the good news with New Mexico is there's so many amazing road trips you can take.
New Mexico is
From here.
incredible naturally.
It is.
I'm grateful to be in the state all the time.
But if somebody just gave you $1 million and said, take the kids, take the wife, go wherever you want, would you be able to? Is there a place that comes to mind?
I mean, honestly, I would go back to Japan. I hate to say it, like I did not get enough when I was there. Europe sounds great and all, and I'm sure we will go to Europe at some point. But I just there was a connection that I felt to Japan that I cannot wait to get back to at some point. I would also like to see parts of Africa. It'd be really great to see South Africa. I'd love to see that western coast over to like Sierra Leone and some of those other coastal towns out there. Morocco would be really cool. But I don't know. There's something about Japan that really like I like lust for that still. I talk to my wife about it all the time. I would really love to get back there at some point.
I've always wanted to go there myself. I'm kind of
yeah.
I'm a bit obsessed with snowboarding, so if nothing more, just for their snow.
Yeah.
And then those monkeys that hang out in the hot springs. between
Oh,
those
sure.
things?
Yes. Oh, I forget what they're called, but I know what you're talking about. And see, I was just in the city the whole time. I really didn't get to experience a lot of the natural beauty of Japan.
Hmm.
Um, which, even being in the cities is incredible. And even at the time when I went, I was not into bonsai yet. I didn't get into that until later. And to be able to get back there and to kind of get back to the heart of where a lot of it was cultivated to its excellence would be really cool.
So in the meantime, while we're staying a little closer to home, do you have any favorite movies or TV shows right now?
I listen to a lot of podcasts. My wife and I will watch shows together. We watched Queen's Gambit. My family and we were really into the Great British Baking Show for a while there. That's a great one. You should watch it. They're so pleasant with each other. Even when they're mean to each other in the Great British Baking Show, they're pleasant. It's hilarious.
Where do you watch
Um,
that? I haven't heard of that
it's
one.
on Netflix.
Okay.
It's a really entertaining show. It's like a competitive show where one chef or one baker gets voted off every week, but it's a really fun and entertaining show. A lot of times I just put on movies that I already know because
Hmm.
9 times out of 10 I'm doing something while it's on. I don't want to work too hard to enjoy the movie. You know what I mean? So I can like
No, I
kind of be
can see
doing
that.
something else at the same time.
And then maybe
Um,
if it's a favorite, you can kind of be multitasking, but maybe you get something new out of it,
yeah,
or
exactly,
you just know
exactly.
it's going to make you laugh.
Like I've always listened to a ton of music, but I've really expanded my kind of musical horizons over this last year. I grew up on kind of a weird mix of music, like somewhat typical, but like not together. So my parents were really into classic rock.
Hmm.
And then my brother, who's older than me, he was really into like gangster rap.
Hmm.
And so that's what I was around all the time was gangster rap and classic rock. And so it's sort of a weird childhood mix of music to come into.
Sure.
So I've always listened to like hip hop. The '90s era of hip hop was always my favorite. I really got into reggae in the early 2000s, and then funk really grabbed me for a long time, new and old. But over this last year, I've listened to more like contemporary bluegrass and country
Hmm.
than I've ever listened to. And there's just some phenomenal artists that are completely atypical of what you would expect out of a like hugely popular country star that have beliefs that align far more with mine than I would ever think that a country star would. There was a couple albums that I've been listening to a lot lately. This guy Odyssey out of Washington D.C. who created an album in the middle of the pandemic, kind of funk, hip hop, sort of spoken word type of art. And he's been making music for a while, but this album in particular is great. Kind of ebb and flow with my musical intake.
Do you
So
remember your first cassette tape by any
I do
chance?
remember my first cassette tape. It was the soundtrack to the first. It was two tapes that my parents bought for me for my birthday. It was the soundtrack to the first Batman movie with Michael Keaton.
Oh,
So it
cool.
had a lot of Prince songs on it.
Hmm.
And then they bought me also Beach Boys' Pet Sounds.
Grew up with Beach Boys, but I don't
Yeah,
remember
that's
that.
the name of the album. No, that's the one.
Okay.
I believe. I believe that's the one that has like Good Vibrations. Um,
Okay. Okay. I guess I
yeah,
just know the name of
it's
it.
it's weird as like a 7-year-old too. I remember getting it and be like, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
And like I don't even think I listened to it much until later. After listening to it later, it kind of connected. Like, oh, these guys are these guys, but it's on this album called Pets. Wait, what? It's just
Yeah.
like the connections didn't all click, but like I forget his name, Brian Wilson,
Hmm.
the main writer for the Beach Boys. He was a little out there. Check it out. It's weird. It's still weird to me. I had a lot of mixtapes too, and kind of how I discovered certain like '90s hip hop was just like it was mixtapes. It was just a bunch of different songs
You
put
recorded
together.
off the radio.
No, I didn't. No, I did. I mean, yes, I did that
Or I
too, but they
did.
were like mixtapes that like a DJ would put together and then they
Oh, yeah,
distribute. And I had a handful of these little mixtapes that were like songs that I couldn't find now, even if I wanted to,
yeah. Mhm.
because they were like a remix of a certain song done by this one DJ. Yeah. And I had a few of those when I was younger that I always really enjoyed and remembered listening to.
I mean, I'm sure you did this too. We sat there listening to the actual radio.
Absolutely.
Too.
Hurry up and record it. Yeah, because and you always miss like the first split second unless they
Yeah,
announce the song that's going to be
yeah,
on. Every once
exactly.
in a while, it would just play without warning, and you're like, oh damn, and you're ready to go, but you still miss the first second or two.
I think I still might have one or two of those around. I don't have a cassette player,
So I've got CDs that I burned when when Napster first came out.
yeah, yeah.
I was a senior in high school, and Napster had like just come out, and like a buddy of mine had his parents had bought like a disc burner, and that it was just
Mm-hmm.
like
It
I
was a big
couldn't
deal.
fathom. Yeah, I just couldn't fathom the idea that like, wait, like it's just that like I just pick the songs and I put them on, and then you can burn it, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
okay. Um, but that was amazing. I still have, I think, some of those mix CDs. That's for sure.
And now we just stream it, or you go back and get some actual vinyl and a record player. And
We actually went back to vinyl. I got all my parents' old vinyl records, and we buy
oh,
a lot of new albums on vinyl. It really forces us to listen through the entire album, which is so enjoyable.
well, I really enjoyed talking to you, Danny. And
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you.
you have any shout outs or plugs?
Honestly, just check out the work, and beyond me, check out what local artisans are making. I think if there's something that I always try to preach to people out of state is New Mexico, Albuquerque, Santa Fe. It's so much more than what is perceived in terms of art. I think there's a perception of what Santa Fe art, and I mean even for that matter Albuquerque art, have to offer. And while that's fantastic, there's a precedent to that, and there's an importance to that. There's a diversity and body of artists here that ranges everything from the traditional to completely contemporary and abstract. And support your local artists, because there's some great ones here, some fantastic artists who are doing really wonderful things, not only for themselves but for the community. So I think it's a great thing that what you're doing and trying to expose that to people. So
Well, thank you, Danny.
yeah.
And good point too about the diversity of the types of art that's being produced in New
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. I talk to a lot of people from out of state that assume it's all howling coyotes and that type of
Turquoise and
thing.
silver, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
while it's fabulous work, and there's some really fabulous work of it, like I definitely don't want to take anything away from that.
no, nothing wrong
um
with that, but that's not all.
No, not even, that's not even the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to it. So,
Exactly.
and that's native artists, Chicano, Hispanic, African American, Caucasian, European, whatever. There's so many different types of people here, much as there is everywhere, of course. But it's an interesting bubble or vacuum that we live in here.
Oh, and
Yeah.
stay in touch and enjoy your evening. And thanks,
Awesome.
and have a great
Thanks,
night.
Anne, so much. Yeah, have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, subscribe, keep the inspiration going, and don't forget to check out Danny Hart Design. Have a good night.